talks are more or less a small sequence. I will first bring you up to date about some of the things that have been done the last year with ConTeXt, and that's actually also a little bit then telling you about the things that have happened with MetaPost and LuaTeX. Then there will be the coffee break. It's a bit fluent, I think, where I can stop and pick up. Then I will switch to talking a bit about the things that have to do with speeding up the process of tagging, and that will be followed up by a talk of Luigi about the Streszczenie project, and in between there we have something about another project that we have been doing, and that is the LuaTeX thing. Yeah, okay. So there will be at some point there will be some mixture between Luigi and me, and then Luigi will take over. Okay, ConTeXt. What has been recently done? As I've told in previous talks, we have at some point made a definite split between, let's say, supporting the old engines, and the old engines for me are PDFTag and CTag, although CTag has never fully been explored by me because I never used it, and the new engine, and that's what LuaTeX is and what I mostly deal with. So in this split, you basically make a complete code split, and then you have to clean up a lot of mess that has been left over from 15 to 20 years of trying to deal with the things that they cannot do, that you have to tweak around. And now I think we have reached the moment that most of the old leftovers are gone. Another important move has been that in the past you always had to work within the constraints of text, memory, string space, hash size, other kinds of stuff. And there has always been some compromises in the old machinery. New machinery, at some point I decided to have a different model of parameterization of all the mechanisms. In theory it's supposed to be slightly less efficient, in practice it's more efficient, but it costs a bit more, let's say, resources. Also not a big deal. Now in this process there's of course a danger that you have to come back to decisions that you made in the past, and you have to sacrifice compatibility. I think this is a very tricky thing in the tech community, because there's always the claim that you can still run your 25-year-old documents. On the other hand, I would say, how many people still make documents that they want to process 25 years from now, that they don't edit and update at all? Yeah?
You would be surprised. I once came across one user who had a 15-year-old document, and he only had a couple of lines to edit, because the graphics package has changed, obviously, in the meantime, and there was LuaTeX. And I told him, yeah, let's change the graphics package. Yeah, but I don't want to edit it.
But those people, yeah, but I would say those people should use the old stuff and keep using the old engines. Not
that's what I told him. Yeah, that's what I told him.
So at one point, I even got a mail from somebody who said, "Oh, like it always breaks when I want." Yeah, but at the same time, the guy was saying, "I try all the new things deep download level." I said, "Well, if you do that, don't be surprised if anything breaks. You cannot make, if you're part of a change, don't expect stability." Okay, that's
like sometimes I have task like that. We have now the task for typesetting all documents with new live PDF with links and so on.
Yeah, but I would personally, when I have a workflow that has to be run for 10 years, right, and I have such workflows, there's a text distribution sitting there, I don't touch it. Yeah? And there is no need to update it if it does what it has to do. There's absolutely no need to update. Sometimes people think, oh, I have to update because then it's like I have to buy this new phone and whatever. But if you only phone, you don't need to update your phone to a smartphone, for instance. Yeah, but okay, this is a bit of a dilemma. I can say most of mechanisms are just compatible, that's not the issue. But there are some things that sometimes change because, okay, we want to get away from that annoying thing. And one of the things that, for instance, change is that in already for more than a year, underscores in ConTeXt are just underscores and not the mathematical subscript thing. They are in math mode, but not in text mode. There's absolutely no reason, not in text mode, to have an underscore not being an underscore, and basically a dollar be a dollar. But okay, that's another extreme. We introduce more hooks and extensions via a mechanism called setups. I'm working on new implementation of the multi-column routines. TeX cannot do multi-columns. That is always like the TeX is used extensively for journals, quite interesting. That used columns, and TeX is absolutely not made to do columns. It is more or less a cheat that you can implement multi-columns by splitting boxes and whatever, but it's not part of the concept. There are a couple of mechanisms that, if you look at it, if you look at the old ways, you say, "Wow, this is really complex." And I try to make them simpler. Sometimes they had to be complex because there was no other way to achieve it. Take, for instance, a simple fact that if you have, let's say, a Unicode font, which is all the characters in one font, it's much more easier than if you have to get all the stuff from different fonts and then do things and let them work together nicely. That's an example of where something complex can become more simple. We are further in the process of exploring the mix between TeX, MetaPost, LuaTeX. One good example is a very old package that I wrote that actually also works in LaTeX. The chemical structure typesetting. It was one of the first things that I ever presented that usefully, probably also here. Completely redone, using much more in MetaPost with a bit of help of Lua, and Alan Braslau is looking into these. He's a mathematician, so we can go for the more mathematical solutions for typical MetaPost problems. And there will be new manual, etc., etc. And really, I think quite important last year, a couple of changes have been that I've been removing some of the ugly leftovers from maths. Oh, why is this done there? Oh, yeah, this still used to be done that way in the past. And we have a more cleaner math implementation. I can show some examples later. Then we have dynamic fonts. Dynamic fonts are, if you define a font and you have a set of features, you basically have a font instance, and those features are more or less frozen with the font. Dynamic fonts means that you can, in the meantime, during the run of your text, change features. You can add, subtract, create a different subset of features, and do all kinds of interesting things with that. It slightly relates to the Oriental Text project for doing advanced web typesetting, where you have, depending on the situation, let's say different feature sets, font feature sets. But another example is that in the running text you can say, okay, I want to switch to small caps. I don't want to find a new font. I just want at this particular small place in my text switch to small caps, so they can easily switch it without defining new fonts or defining new features and feature sets. It's a convenience thing. So the next thing on the to-do list is there is some code that is generic. The font code, the LuaTeX font code of ConTeXt is used also for plain and LaTeX, and it's already split reasonably well. But I probably will split it even more so that I have more freedom to go on with some of the things that I have in mind for ConTeXt. That would be more or less difficult to do if I would keep these two things too intertwined, because then you have the danger that if I do some experimental stuff, that it will break the mechanisms that I used in plain and LaTeX. That's more a practical thing. There's a lot of work, that kind of things. I want to work on some math extensions. For instance, there is in MathML and in OpenMath, there is this concept of dictionaries that you say, I'm working in this field, and this field has specific rendering properties, maybe also, let's say, the different use of symbols than in other cases, with different spacing properties and whatever, and I want to group these things and look into that and support this more or less this mass dictionary model. It's just a pet project. Nobody's asking for it. I've cleaned up most of the LuaTeX specific code nowadays, but there's still a lot of styles, presentation styles and other things that I also need to split up. Now, once I've done that, we are basically ready for 2 distributions, like the old thing that will never change, and a new thing, lean, mean, fast, small, and that will make, I have this idea that tech installation, whatever, should be simple. If you look at I recently, in the process of testing tech live, there was an issue, and I said, okay, let's make a fresh virtual machine and install tech live. Installing the virtual machine, Linux SUSE-box, took less than 10 minutes, and it was installing from the web, from the net. So there was not DVD involved. It just took less than 10 minutes, and then I was installing tech live, and that took 3/4 of an hour. And so it's, in my opinion, getting a bit out of hand. We keep carrying this enormous legacy thing around. And if you look at the basic ConTeXt LuaTeX here, distribution, how big is it, Martha? 150 megabytes if you include all the fonts? Something like that, yeah? Only Mark 4 with fonts. I think something like 150 megabytes. So that's a lot less than if you talk about installing that. Now, if I nowadays have to install on a machine ConTeXt, I just get it from the ConTeXt card, and it's on regular normal lines, it's less than a minute work. Yeah, so it's far more convenient to think of smaller. That's one of the ideas that I have in mind for the future. And we're already close. I really want to play a bit more with the Lua part builder. I have rewritten the part builder from Tech in Lua already for a couple of years. Still playing with that, don't have too much time with that. It might even be that at some point ConTeXt will use the Lua part builder instead of the Tech one, because I found out that by now I was able to make it only 2 times slower than the C version, which is quite okay. We will add a little bit more bidirectional layout support. So there's a difference, if you go from right to left, typesetting is one thing, but how should the layout be dealt with? There's always this, like, if you have a pure right to left document, your footnotes start at the right. If you have a left to right document, they start at the left. Now, what is your dominant layout? Is your dominant layout right to left or left to right? And what choices do you have to make? Quite interesting. The same problem a bit with Chinese, which goes from top to bottom, is that if you really ask people what the properties are of, let's say, right to left typesetting, there's seldom a consistent answer to that. So it's probably something that I have to explore myself. Much of that is already present, but this is again one of the, sometimes you are looking for interesting things to explore, and this is one of the interesting things to explore. Out of scripting, this means that we have these fonts, and the fonts have properties that can be driven by language and script. And the question is, to what extent can you automate that? Can you say, if I have input, can I automatically adapt to the script and language? Sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes it might be interesting. There is some basic functionality present now. I'm not entirely satisfied about it, because tech is always about control. Yeah. So the more you automate, the more people start asking, how can I get around it, and then you end up with ugly hacks and whatever. So you better think in advance about how you implement control, then later start thinking about how you provide hacks to get around it. And I want to explore a little bit more what is needed in the CLD interface. CLD interface is that you basically define your styles and do your coding in Lua. And in ConTeXt it's possible to do everything in Tech or in Lua. So you can have your complete style set up in a different programming language. This is something I'm really behind, is that the user interface of ConTeXt is English, but there are 6 other interface languages available, and I have to pick up that thread and and fix them all to add and translate keywords that I had forgotten to do. Okay, so that was more or less the context part. MetaPost. We already had something in context called instances, so you could have, in LuaTeX there's the MetaPost library. And you can have multiple instances of that. So you can, for instance, say, I'm doing chemical typesetting. I define for this specific module a MetaPost instance that only deals with this. So it's completely isolated from the rest. So whatever users do and errors they make, it will never bleed into this instance that is reserved for typesetting chemicals. A similar thing you can think of the graph package. Yeah? There's this graph package in MetaPost, and we are actually going to rewrite it because it's a little bit flawed. It would be interesting to have that run into the new large number model of MetaPost, so that it doesn't interfere with something else. So we already had instances, and I added a bit more configurability because I mentioned it. We now have two number models. We have the traditional MetaPost numbers, which run to, well, this is something like 4K. It's not that precise, or cannot be that large. And we have the new IEEE model, so that you can make graphics that span the distance from, let's say, the Earth to the Moon and back, and you can make really big images. And Martin I think Martin will extend PDF to support that kind of stuff, isn't it? I don't know what the upper limit is there, but we can go real big in MetaPost now. 5 meters or whatever you wanted. 5 meters, okay, so MetaPost definitely can go beyond that now.
Wasn't it? I remember Hartmut explaining to me that you now have in the Earth Moon system you have you can do MetaPost with infinite precision, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. The PDF is lagging behind, so we cannot paint on the sky yet. Interesting thing is when Taco has added this, let's say, large number stuff, MetaPost instantly became slow, real slow. And the nice thing about MetaPost was that it was always lightning fast. Okay, so the first thing we figured out that there were so many memory leaks that needed to be fixed, and then after that it became a bit faster. But, well, the thing is, the whole memory model which is built into MetaPost is built for speed. Yeah, it does its own memory management. And now we have different memory management. We used basically the C libraries and the operating system, and that's always slower. So I had this manual, and I come back to it later, I spent a lot of time on speeding up things. So this manual could process in 12 seconds. Suddenly it took 60 seconds. Wait a minute, what if I don't go wrong in context? That suddenly takes 60 seconds. Then I found out 16. So it went from 12 to 16. And then because I have a lot of tracing about timing, I found out that 4 seconds were spent on MetaPost. And that used to be less than half a second. So it was 8 times slowed down. And the reason was that I set up some kind of page model in MetaPost. Because if I have page related graphic, and setting up the model, which involves quite some variables and initializations, was so slow that I decided to change that into delayed initialization. And so I had back my speed, but in the meantime Taco had used that same code that I had to debug all the stuff that he has. And I think by now the MetaPost version that will go on that live is reasonably free in the sense of memory issues. And so we're more or less back at a reasonable space. I still think that the new MetaPost is 2 times. Maybe Jasko have more details about that because the same thing happens with generating the fonts. Yeah, you need suddenly supercomputers to generate the tactile mask collection. Okay, we will on the to-do list is we will re-implement and extend the graph package. Graph package is by John Hobby. Is I don't know how many people know it. It has some limitations. The Lua code itself, already a year ago, but it's actually only being used now, I think. I've isolated a lot of the font code so that it has a better abstraction when it's used in for instance, LaTeX or whatever. You can layer around it and configure it a bit better. I think the basic models are more or less stable. Of course, you try to get rid of bugs and other things, but there will be no more fundamental changes. Another thing I already told something about the class LuaTeX is that I'm currently doing projects where we need SQL and things like that, and so I'm now building that kind of stuff into ConTeXt, support for databases, publishing for databases, runtime queries and things like that. And there will be a lot of helper code to deal with templates and other things. So that might as well at some point be another subsystem, just Lua, MP, SQL support, whatever. And the CLD manual is on the website. It has been extended. It now also explains a bit of the font machinery and things like that. And
what is CLD?
ConTeXt Lua documents. So it's defining context, doing context command or whatever you want in style in Lua. So you can have a tech input, which is backslash based. You can have a Lua input, which is Lua based. These are two, and they can work together. Message tracing, I try to make that also more consistent. You know, if you, that's a real big difference between programming in Tech and in a language like Lua. In a language like Tech, well, messages, lots of strings, lots of mesh they add. You don't do that many of them. In let's say regular programming languages, you are far more easy at tracing information, more detailed, more things like that. And I've cleaned up that bit a bit because over time it starts to get inconsistent. This one is an important one. I found out that at some point, if you have this tech machinery, it's very nice to work in the tech ecosystem. You know, there are not that many languages that have a more or less well-defined, maintained, distributed, and whatever ecosystem as tech has with TDS, tech live, things like that. And no matter how much criticism we can have on it, it works quite well. So if I have a project and I have to do some programming, I use Lua because, well, by now I'm reasonably fluent in that. And then in many cases I use LuaTeX or Tech Lua as the Lua interpreter because, well, it's the one on my system. It has a couple of libraries like LPAD built in, which is fine. So for me, Tech, LuaTeX, Tech Lua, whatever, is basically the only application that I use for doing everything. I don't need any other programming language. When I was testing Tech Live, and Karel asked me something about MP to PDF, which is a Perl script, I found out that I didn't have Perl on my system. And just as when I was doing testing Mark II on one of the Linux machines, I found out that it didn't bother to install Ruby. You know, I just can't, but that's because you can, if you have LuaTeX, you can use Lua for everything. There's only one drawback a bit, that is, sometimes you need to use the traditional, let's say the basic core Lua program, and then you have a problem that if you have your whole machinery made for LuaTeX, that it not necessarily runs on stock Lua because there are libraries involved and other things. So one of the things I've done is that all the ConTeXt libraries, there are a lot of libraries that are just part of distribution, can now be packaged in what I call MTX libs. So if you have a project, you say, okay, I want to use this, helper, and that stuff. You run a command, it creates a big library file for you, and you can carry that along with the project, so that you have, again, continuity. As I mentioned, 10 years, projects that you have for 10 years. You can then carry that library with them, and you are completely compatible with Tech, in my case, ConTeXt libraries and the Lua libraries. So it's more getting into a more general purpose usable framework for that kind of things. What's next on the to-do list? ConTeXt doesn't use the Apache library. We have our own library, file finding and support library. I think by now, after some 4 or 5 years of LuaTeX, it's time to have a look at it again and to get rid of stuff that I put there just to be compatible with good old times, and well, we don't need that anymore. But it's a boring job, because if you really look how TeX and TDS and Apache works, it's a bit messy. Bit messy. It's a bit.
Only a bit.
Well, you know, it's somewhat undefined. I still remember that when I wrote the first version, and I asked Carl, how is that supposed to work? I said, well, I don't know. I have to look in the source. You know, it's a sort of constant build-up of, oh, we want to have this, oh, we want to have that, and it gets added. And at some point, you know, you have the situation, okay, now I have to look at it fresh again. And I want to pick up the run from zip experiment. And so
What's that?
What?
What's that?
Actually, I had it working 3-4 years ago, but I never followed up on that. You zip the tag tree, so you have one file called textmkIV.zip, and that's the one that your whole tag runs from. So you have one binary and one zip. And I had it as proof of concept. It was one of the first things I did with LuaTeX, and it actually worked. But as I said, I never followed up on it. So I want to pick it up because it's nicer for an install. If you have a portable install, try to install, let's say, 10,000 files on a USB stick. Yeah, that is not fun. Yeah?
Not an option.
No, it's not an option. At Pragma we always had what we call framework for doing web services. So you know, if you have some kind of project where I'll take this project that you discuss about generating these journals. Tech is not a program that you say, I run it and it's ready in 1/10 of a second. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, it always takes some time. And if you are bad luck, it takes several runs to get everything right. So it's not an option to say, I have 10,000 users logged in, they all hit the button, they all run tech at the same time, and you can forget about your system. So you always need some kind of what I say, delayed processing. You know, your job tickets, you say, okay, I want to have this process, there's a subsystem that takes care of it, it processes things at a certain point, it puts them someplace, gives a signal back that it's ready, etc., etc. That's what I call this framework. There's quite some framework code that we have for running tech jobs, managing tech jobs, watch folder support, all that kind of stuff. Has always been there. I now have most of that done in Lua. The thing is, I could probably put it in the distribution and people would have a nice start with it. But the thing is, it would add another, you know, workload on me to maintain the stuff and all that. But I might eventually do it, because that's the other thing I told you. Tech has nice distribution infrastructure. So all my projects, if I have files and whatever, I always put them in the text structure, because we have file lookup, we have manageability, we have everything. So for me, it's sometimes easier if I write code just to put it in context, even if I'm the only user, because then if I install something on the system, I know it's there. That might be a reason to put it there for that reason. Then, coming year, we will talk more about it later with Luigi. Experiment with some libraries that might be of interest. Sockets, especially ZeroMQ, has some. I don't know if anybody knows ZeroMQ, but if you look at it, there's some magic in there. There's, yeah, wait a minute, this should be put to use. Yeah? And I'm still not sure about it. Maybe some distributed processing, or maybe even running different tech engines, and they're all doing things, whatever. Sometimes you need to go a bit beyond what tech does now. TSL is another interesting library. There's a lot of mathematical stuff in there, and also for generating graphics. It sometimes look like sort of GNU plot plus, and actually it's already it has already Lua based. LuaTeX. Well, this is something that is of some importance, I think. You know, text is a program that is not really fast in terms of, you know, you have to process something. If you have to process a document of 400 pages with let's say 15,000 graphics, because you have MetaPost graphics and things like that, you can imagine that it takes a bit of runtime to get that kind of animals done. Now, I still remember the time that we were doing XML-based projects, and that to process one of those documents using Mark II would take at least 45 minutes. 3 runs, lots of graphics. It was all the publisher stuff, so you know, even the bitmap graphics were like a 10 megabyte shit that got in just because well, that's the way it's produced. So everything was big and slow and whatever. I think the same document in current Mark IV forward would be done in minutes instead of that. So that's already an improvement.
On new computer?
On the same computer.
On the same?
Yeah, one of the reasons is MetaPost, by being embedded, MetaPost is so much faster. That makes a big difference. But Mark IV overall is faster than the traditional run on computers. Anyway, I will come back to that later. So that is if you imagine that ConTeXt spends 50% of his time in Lua, yeah? And 50% in Tech. That when we read about Lua Git, just-in-time compiling, that we had this idea, okay, this could speed up probably ConTeXt a bit. This will never be linear in the sense that if you took us some time to figure out the right formulas for that, if you spend 50% of your time in Lua, and that can be twice as fast, then you can of course only win a quarter at most. Yeah, so it doesn't scale linearly, but at least it can give us feedback. So we did our initial tests, and no matter what we tested, turning just-in-time compilation on didn't make any difference. So you see on the website, you see all these fantastic numbers like we are doing lots of complex mathematical calculations, and instead of something that normally in normal Lua would take 10 seconds, takes 1 second in JIT, things like that. And we couldn't see any improvement in LuaTeX with that. On the other hand, we found out that by using the Lua JIT version was processing faster. So it was, I think, some 20 to 40% faster, but not the JIT part. So the core interpreter is faster because it's more targeted to the specific architectures, but turning on JIT doesn't make really much of a difference. There's a good reason for that, because if you really look at how it's specified, then you see that it will speed up a lot of calculations and other stuff, and in Tech you don't do any calculations. It's neglectable what you do in terms of calculations. Most of the thing is node list manipulation, table building, etc. Nevertheless, 10 to 40% speed up is not bad, is it? If you have an automated workflow. You must imagine that in our case we have situations where the user logs in, makes some choices, does some selections, hits the button, and 5 or 6 products are being produced. And then it makes a difference if it takes, let's say, 15 seconds or 20 seconds. Yeah, you're in the comfort zone. It's like do you have to wait? If it takes, if it would take 5 minutes, you have a coffee break. Yeah, then you go away. But it's going fast enough to be okay. I stay here, sit here, and then 5 or maybe 10 seconds gain is interesting. So this is, by the way, the reason why we now have LuaTeX and LuaTeX. And LuaTeX is this year not yet in Tech Live, I think. I don't know the exact reason for it, but next year I think it will be in there. You can download it.
You mean this year, next year? 213?
213 is this year, yeah. basically.
So it won't get into this year's release.
No, it won't get into 2013. It will get into 2014, hopefully. But all the tests we've done so far, it's compatible. It works nice. It is no problem. And of course, you can always get it from the ConTeXt garden. You have all the binaries for all the platforms on the ConTeXt garden, so you can always get them there. Other LuaTeX things, well, Taco did the periodical check of tracker items, the bugs and things, small things like that. He didn't do too much fundamental work this year. We were both busy. It's also good to have some kind of stability into the system. Say, okay, this works. You can fix the bugs, make it, let's say, production version, things like that. But quite some work went into the MetaPost library. That one has been extended and again integrated. Other areas that have seen improvement is if you, and this has always been a bit of an issue with TeX. If TeX writes something to your log, the terminal, it does it on a character by character basis. This means that if you, for instance, on Windows, the DOS box, so to say, the console in Windows is real time. So every character that gets written gets instantly refreshed. There are actually wrappers around it, like console 2. I always use console 2, which is much faster because it does some caching. If you look at, for instance, the consoles on Unix, they normally have some kind of delay built in, few hundred milliseconds or whatever, so there's caching going on. If you look at OS X, it really makes a big difference what fonts you choose. So if you have very advanced fonts that needs lots of processing, then the terminal gets really slow. So if you have a text-based workflow and you somehow have a lock screen or whatever, it really makes sense to look what fonts you have enabled there, because it makes a big difference in runtime. And I'm not talking about 5%, I'm talking about 50% or 100%. Yeah? And that is true for each operating system, and definitely if you work over lines and long distances. And now imagine that you have a remote terminal situation where you even have the VCN, or even more refreshing and whatever going on. If I make a TeX format on a remote terminal, then it takes 4 times as much time due to all the refreshing as on my own machine. Things like that. So at some point we were looking at, I was looking at, can we speed that up? And I found out by looking at the source that it's highly inefficiently implemented in TeX. And I prototyped a variant in Lua, which suddenly made all those delays go away. And then discussing with Taco and Taco, basically we did that in the TeX end, so that the TeX end does some better buffering and things like that. So this is a substantial bottleneck that has been removed. Think of it that on my system, generating a format, context format it's not a newer system, took 6 seconds, now it takes 4 seconds. And so 2 seconds is mainly due to logging to the terminal.
But there are a few rare cases where change doesn't write single character to log, but just long, underfull, H-box, badness, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
so in theory it seems to be possible. It's not a big move to do it consistently everywhere. Like you can do for the error messages.
No, it's done everywhere. It's not.
No.
The error message, well, let's say the error message is where the one, when I generate the format, it's get most notably in the messages. But if you have a production run, and you have many, even very small overfull boxes, you have situations, sometimes you have these harmless situations, then you get enormous logs, and then you have the same problem. So in a production run, indeed. But that all goes through the same print routine in TeX, and that print routine was, doing all kinds of funny things, but not being efficient. Eventually, I think one of the next versions, the whole message system, whatever, will be redone anyway. So that is more like the way it's done in normal programming languages and not in.
You said we are print routine.
Yeah. Yes, well, that's how I prototyped it. I replaced everything but Lua printing, and suddenly I had less problems. Yeah. I did some part builder experiments with ConTeXt, which is a simplified HZ. HZ, that is this, stretching the glyphs horizontally. The kind of stuff. What is it? Microtypography or whatever kind of tags it gets. Of course, microtypography makes absolutely no sense on lower resolution devices like, for instance, this one. If you look at the source, well, what I did is I was translating the C part builder into Lua, and then I found out that this whole HZ stuff was implemented quite inefficiently. There has always been complaints that if I turn it on, why does my tab run so slow? Well, that's because a lot of calculations are done for each character each time, again and again and again. And they are done at the tag end, and they are done in the back end. And they are done when, in the meantime, boxes are being packaged. So I found out that there is a more clever way of doing this, and I prototyped that in Lua. I even extended tag a little bit to do that, and Luigi and I played with that, and it looks quite promising because there's hardly any speed penalty. So then is the question, should we backport it to tag? And Hartmut is now working on that. So we decided not to do that for the current tag live version, because it's a rather fundamental change, but after that it will be done for LuaTeX, and then we will have a much faster and efficient and also a better separation between front and back end of the whole HZ and font manipulation stuff. So this is one of the places where it's really handy to have Lua for experimenting things and then backporting it to the machinery. Well, next on the to-do list, as I already mentioned, we are going to remove some of that old stuff that sits there and well, it's not really used or could be replaced with something better. So sometimes we look at it and then Taco and I discuss, wait a minute, yeah, oh, why is this blah blah blah, and I said, yeah, okay, that's because in the past blah blah blah. There was a lot of legacy stuff sitting there. Together with Luigi, I'm working on the Swicklip project that will be discussed later on. I think it runs quite well, but you will hear more about that later. So that's also on the to-do list. As I already mentioned, with Hartmut we will get the X factor implemented in the backend. X factor is just another field in the glyph nodes. And we have still some pending IDs that need to be done. And they really need to be done because sometimes now you have to work around things. So we still have enough to do.
And can you go back? What is the X factor thing?
X factor. Now, if you have technically spoken, if you have a glyph and the glyph gets extended, yeah, what happens now is that each time that this glyph is added to, let's say that if tag is calculating the paragraph, the breakpoints, for each glyph it's recalculating the permitted extension, yeah? And it's not stored with the glyph. So it does it, it gets some value of how good and bad this line is, and moves on to the next one. Then at some point when it's done, the backend, there's a few parameters that tell how this was treated. Then in the backend doesn't know anything that happened with this glyph. So the backend only knows that it has to be extended and has to do all the calculations again. Yeah? One of the things I did is I said, wait a minute, we have already calculated it. We calculated at the tag end, we add this information to the glyph, we pass it to the backend, we have a clear separation, the backend doesn't need to know anything about the font, only has to look at this specific extension value of the glyph. That is the X factor. This is one of these things where you say, okay, should we be 100% compatible with all tag? I think we don't need to be fully extendable because it's a visual thing. And as long as we operate within the position, it's okay. But then we use a lot of simplification. Fonts. Yeah, there will be a few extensions that I've made in ConTeXt to handling fonts and whatever, I will normalize them. It may be nice for another talk. More about that. And I want to give users a little bit more control in tweaking fonts if they want to do really nasty things. Techies always like to tweak and mess around with these things, so that gives them the hooks and tools. And I really want to see if it makes sense to mess with the Lua Pipe Builder. You know, can you make? There are some limitations to building paragraphs. Maybe they can be improved by using the Lua Pipe Builder and extending it. Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't even make sense. Maybe people no longer care about these issues. Yeah, we have discussed them before. Why spend all the time if, well, there is already support for elementy in the core. Most people don't know that. That's because we don't advertise it. It was implemented by a guy in the Netherlands who needed it for his typesetting work, and it was actually quite slow. So I redid a lot of the code. I will probably go over it once again. It's now quite acceptable. I think a couple of things that need to be sorted out, and we need to test a couple of things, but it's there. It's rather complex stuff, but I think it works quite well. I think Karl Pischka is the only one who in the room who ever used that kind of stuff.
All the things you told about in the last two sections is the LuaTeX engine, so it comes also for... No?
The Devanagai is just implemented in Lua.
No, the things before.
The before was Lua.
So that comes also free for LaTeX.
Yeah, most of those things, yeah. You know, the thing with HZ, if that's changed, that's why we backport it to the machinery.
Yeah.
User won't notice it because the engine does it. Yeah.
It's faster.
Yeah, it's faster. Yeah, it's faster and more convenient. And the same is true for the logging and all these things. It's true. That's also that is, you know, of course, because I prototype a lot of the kind of stuff. It might be that ConTeXt is earlier in adopting and supporting this thing. But if as soon as something ends up in the engine, everybody benefits.
Yeah.
Manuals. There's always a complaint that there are not enough manuals. So I made a few manuals that probably nobody will read anyway.
These are plans or these are
things
that have been done?
That's the new. No, this has been done. New manual template SQL. I've updated the Skype manual because you have a very advanced LuaTeXa by now. Extreme tables. This is already a year-old mechanism. Complete new additional mechanism for making very complex tables. This is again one of these areas when you have a project where you have to make HTML-like real complex tables. They take a lot of runtime if you do it in TeX. If you do this now in the LuaTeX combination, it's 2 or 3 times faster. I kept the old mechanism, just made a new one. Making the old one took me a month, making a new one a week. There's a technical font manual, I will show that later. And some of the documentation, you know, I always am a bit reluctant in distributing the sources of manuals because there are 2 reasons for that. As soon as I do it, users start copying covers and other things. So I see back my old stuff. Well, that's actually the look and feel of ConTeXt, I would say. That's a bit like you make a presentation style and people start messing around with this and making ugly derived work. And that somehow backfires, I think. But anyhow, I put now some sources that I'm also satisfied about how the source code looks. I spend a lot of time on making source code look okay. Probably too much time, but I can't stand ugly source code. And that's the same for document code. So if I only put things online with document codes, for me, looks nice. They are now available in the zip 4 or 5 manuals.
Can you slowly wrap up for the break?
Yeah. I have to check the MetaPost manual because, of course, MetaPost has been extended. I have to check and extend the XML manual. It's probably quite okay, but there have been some additional things. This is laying on my desk already for 2 years now to update the master manual. Not that anybody here probably is interested in ML, but anyhow I've done it, so the manual should be updated. A couple of specific manuals. I already now make a split between Mark II manuals and Mark IV manuals. Forget about the old stuff, just make the new. Don't revision the old, just start from scratch. And there will be a new beginner's manual, I think in a month or so, because my colleague is working on that. Updating it. Chemistry manuals.
That's interesting with the
Yeah.
introductory manual.
The thing is, the thing is there, you would say beginner's manual shouldn't be changed too much because not much changed in the interface, but what did change is that fonts became more easier. We got rid of encodings, things like that. So there are actually a lot of changes to beginner's manuals. You can basically kick out a lot and then you can bring in a few other things, of course, like maybe some MetaPost that wasn't in there. So it's actually more work than at first sight you would think of. Scripts. Well, we had to provide additional help info, man pages. I never use man pages, but Moitza used them a lot, I think. So she was behind this. Wasn't you? The deal with Carl. Relatively, the scripts. I think most of the scripts are relatively stable, but I will probably redo them anyway. Currently ConTeXt shipped with, I think, 5 or 6 lexers using the LPEG lexing mechanism, and I think they are quite advanced. You can visualize mixed text code, Lua code, MetaPost, whatever code. It automatically adapts to the coloring to embedded sections of MetaPost. I've done the same with CWeb and other things. So there's a really advanced bunch of lexers. You can do the real-time spell checking during your run, whatever. There's a lot of stuff in there. I consider them to be the reference lexers, in the sense that if somebody writes something for another editor, they should look at how that is done. I found out, I think I discussed that last year, I cannot stand ugly source code, and lexing helps me to somehow visualize how I do that. And there is a sort of, it's a two-way thing. The way you write code and the way you visualize it. And somehow that works out quite well with Skype and also the newer lexers. Okay, so the next talk would be about speed, and we will have a break first.
Thank you very much.